Welcome to Name Three Songs. I'm Sarah Feigin.
And I'm Jenna Million. And this is the podcast where we take the piss and debunk music fan stereotypes. Because let's be honest, fangirls knew about that band way before you did.
And if you stick around long enough, we'll also let you in on some new music that girls are already crazy about.
All right, so today we're very excited to be joined by our very first guest and friend, Sophia Ragomo. Sophia, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for all the listeners, since we are already friends?
I'm a music photographer, just like Jenna and Sarah. That's kind of how we met. They always tell you not to meet your friends on the internet, but we all met on the internet. So, yeah, probably not the best life lesson. But I'm 22 and I started photography when I was 17. Well, actually, I started photography when I was 15. I started music photography when I was 17. And I was working for my high school newspaper, and there's this band that went to my high school called the Greeting Committee, and we were doing a story on them, and they needed photos. So they were coming through on their tour with Kitten like the following night. I was like, oh, that would be perfect. So I went to the show and took photos and just fell in love with it.
Nice. And where are you based out of?
I'm currently in New Jersey, but I was working in New York before the pandemic. So
Cool.
East Coast, yeah.
It's always just like so weird when it's like before the pandemic. It's like... Oh my god. So we invited Sophia on to the show today because we thought it'd be interesting to have a discussion about being young and female in the music industry, because I know both Jenna and myself also started concert photography as teenagers, and so I'm sure we all have a bunch of stories. I think just to start things off, I mean, I feel like Jenna and I have been trying to let you guys get to know us a bit, but also I feel like there's been so much that we're just like, oh, they like not brought up. So I'm 28 years old. I started concert photography when I was around 16. So I grew up on Long Island, which is the birthplace of a lot of emo music from the early 2000s, which obviously explains a lot of my personality because 100% of everything I say always comes back to MySpace.
And we love that about you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a personality trait that I didn't realize was actually a thing until we started recording this, and I actually bring up MySpace whenever I possibly can. But yeah, so I have been been interested in photography for like most of my life. But I started bringing my camera to shows when I was 16. I got into it because I went to see Arctic Monkeys at Terminal 5 in New York City, and there was a woman in the photo pit, which at the time I just thought it was like the area in front of the barricade. Like I didn't know how to name. And I just like tapped her and I was like, hey, is this your job? She was like, yeah. And I was like, your job is to take photos of Arctic Monkeys? And she was like, no, my job is to take photos of bands. She was like, I'm on assignment. I was like, you were assigned to take photos of Arctic Monkeys? And she was like, yeah. And she was like, oh, like, are you interested in photography? And I had like my dinky little like Sony like point and shoot camera that had like 2 megapixels per photo, because it was like 2006, I think, or 2007. And I was like, oh yeah, like I always bring my camera to concerts. Like I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just really into it. And she basically was like, if you want to get into it, the smartest thing to do is just bring your camera to shows and show up and talk to people. And so I started going to like local shows, and I would bring my film camera with me. And then my parents eventually bought me a digital camera. And at like that time, I was like friendly with this little band from MySpace called The Main. And they gave me my first ever photo pass. And the photos were horrible. I used my on-camera flash. I had no idea what I was doing. But the thing that I always found really interesting is about the first 3 years that I did concert photography, I only thought that girls did concert photography. Because every show I ever went to, it was just me and like 3 other girls, and that was it. And I don't know if it was like, but there were also shows in the city, and I never really saw any guys. And if I did, they were like older and didn't talk to us. But it was like me, this girl Vicky Matthews, and then Catherine Powell, and it was just like us. And then as we started getting older, there would be more girls, but not that often you'd see guys. And if you did see guys, they were usually like friends with the band. Like my first experience meeting a guy my age, shooting shows, was meeting Tom Falcone at the main Boys Like Girls Good Charlotte tour, and he helped me understand how my digital camera worked because I'd never used a DSLR before. And after the first like set like song of the mains, I just was like, I had like a kit lens on my camera and all the photos were blurry and it was awful, and I put my digital camera back in my bag and I took out my film camera and I started shooting with that because I knew how it worked. And because I think my parents had bought me my digital camera like 3 months before, and I had shot like a couple of the main shows in like small venues, so I just used my flash because I didn't know any better. And then after the like first 3 songs, he like came out to me outside the photo pit and he was like, "Did you stop shooting digital to shoot film because your camera confused you? Because that's what it looks like happened." And I was like, maybe. And he was like, "Do you need help?" And I was like, "Yes." And so he like showed me how my camera worked. So my experience at the beginning of this was that it didn't matter if you were a boy or a girl, because in my mind it was a girls' game. It didn't matter how old you were, and guys were nice to you. So a lot has changed. um but again, we'll get to that a bit later on. Jenna, when did you start, and what was like your first sort of experiences with it?
So I was also 16 and I live in Austin, Texas. So I guess I got into photography. Like my dad always had camera equipment around. So I was like kind of like grew up around it. And then I was on Tumblr, not MySpace. And I like found like Ashley Osborne and Matt Vogel and like Tom Falcone, like you said, like them posting photos of like all the pop punk bands, and I was just like, wow, like they're so cool, like I want to be like them, I want to take photos like this. And then like around that, when I was like 15, 16, I took like a photography class in high school and started like actually learning how to use a camera. And then I found like a small little tiny online blog that I was like writing for, because I started out writing, and then like eventually they gave me a photo pass, and my first show was also the main at this like really tiny, really gross, sweaty venue that doesn't exist anymore. And that was like my very first time doing it. And same thing, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I would like shoot in automatic and then like switch to manual and like mimic the settings and then switch back to automatic and like figure out like what I was supposed to set things as. So a lot of it was like learning in my photo class, just like the rules of photography. And then like actually a lot of it was like teaching myself like on the ground and stuff. And then I didn't shoot like anything after that for a while, probably like 6 months went by. And then my next two shows was Fun, which was right after they had won like a Grammy nomination, or they had won a Grammy for some nights or whatever they won for. And then of Monsters and Men. And so like those two bands at the time were playing Stubbs in Austin, which is like a 2,000 cap venue, and that's like our biggest venue unless you play like the next level, which is like 5,000. And at the time we didn't even have the 5,000 amphitheater, so it was like Stubbs was basically our biggest venue, and then it was like an arena. So that was like a pretty big deal for me to be like shooting for, like I felt like, pretty big deal for me to be shooting those bands that were like playing venues like that, selling out 2,000 people. It was like really cool. And I just remember by time I got to those, like the bigger shows, like Stubbs, all of the other photographers were over 21. I was literally the only one in the pit underage, like for so long. And I think like the smaller like pop punk shows, there were some people who were younger, but like at the bigger shows, I just remember because I'd have like the underage wristband on and everyone else had like the overage wristband. And I was like very shy, and I think I was intimidated a lot of like, I'm just staying in my bubble, like I'm just doing me, like I don't want to bother anyone, like these are the pros. And like I was just like very intimidated by all of them. And so like literally for like until I was 21, like I was shooting with the same people all the time in the pit, and like really never talked to them because I was so like shy about it. And now I know most of them by name and like I'm friends with them and stuff. But I think there is definitely like the the trope of the older like photo dude who has like his giant lens, that like those type of people exist in Austin as far as like looks go. But everyone was always nice to me. I never like had any instances of running into anyone who was mean about anything. And now it's changed a lot. Like now when I go to shows, there's a lot of like underage people shooting in the pit. So it's good to see that like it's evolved and grown and like expanded to new audiences.
Well, my memory of when I first started shooting, so I started shooting with a digital camera in like 2008. I was 16 in 2008. And when I was shooting, and this was like at the beginning of like social media really being a thing, because I think that Instagram didn't start until like 2011, maybe. So it was just like MySpace and Tumblr. And like people from MySpace, like they would have like photo pages and stuff, but it was never to the extent of like how things are now with Instagram. And so it felt like people who were doing it were just doing it because they were really interested in doing something within the industry, but they either, like from my experience, like I tried so hard to be in a band and I just like was not musically gifted in that way. And so I liked photography and I was like, oh, okay, like this will be my way to like be involved in the music industry that in this sort of way. Because also at that time when I was like looking at college and all that sort of stuff, like everyone was telling me from every direction, like, oh, the music industry is dying, like record labels aren't going to be here in like 3 years. But also they had no idea what was coming, like with social media and like kind of the rebirth of the music industry in a weird way. So when I first started, it just felt like it was a bunch of people who really love music and we were just like trying to get involved. When I first started, and even now when people are like, oh, how do you get into photography? I'm always like, go to your small local venues that don't have a pit, that don't have camera policies, bring your camera, like talk to people, like do it that way. And then you'll see people that are younger just in the photo pit having no idea what they're doing. And it's because like social media owns everything. And if like a 16-year-old has like 10K Instagram followers, they're going to get approved for no reason other than the fact that they have Instagram followers. And so Sophia, as somebody who's from like who grew up in like a smaller city and then moving to Brooklyn and being young and doing this, did you ever feel like other people your age were just doing it for clout instead of doing it for actual interest? Or like what has been your experience with that, being somebody who's young right now in the digital scape that we're in?
No, it's very interesting. I definitely feel like there are people that I've had DM me and be like, "Oh, can you get me a photo pass for this band that you know?" And a lot of times it's bands like I don't even feel like I have a fully formed relationship with. Like I might have met them once or twice and like shot portraits with them backstage or whatever, but I'm by no means their best friend. Like I barely feel comfortable asking for something for myself, like credential wise. And I feel lucky if they give me like all access to the show. So yeah, it's just like been a bit awkward in those circumstances because I feel like sometimes people like they'll see young people getting stuff and then they'll be like, oh, I want that, but like I don't know how to get there, but like I want you to help me get there. And it's just like I was in Kansas when I started. I had like no one to ask about like what was right to do, so I just kind of figured it out on my own.
Yeah.
And it worked out okay. Like I taught myself Photoshop and Lightroom on my own. I shot my first show in JPEG, which like is literally terrible, but we've all been there.
Yeah. Oh,
And
100%. I don't think I
I was
discovered RAW for like 5 years, so you're
yeah,
fine.
and I was just like so motivated to like finally have something exciting to do with my photography that I like wanted to learn everything that I possibly could. But like I think that's kind of what people are missing now is that like the information is out there. You just have to look for it. And like I didn't have anyone help me. So I think that teaching yourself is like also the best way to build like, I don't know, not character, but like perseverance kind of.
Also, just off of that, like because obviously like you're 22 now, but you moved to New York for college, so you've been shooting like in Brooklyn and New York City since you were like 18. And so did you have instances when you were younger that like people on your course or just like on the internet were being like, well, we're the same age, like you should help me, like why do you have this? Or were there ever comments being like, but you're just a teenager, like why should you have this and not me?
Well, I felt like more like that in person than I
Yeah.
did like on the internet ever, because like I didn't really like advertise my age on the internet that much because
Yeah.
I just really didn't feel like it was important. But there were like a few instances, like I can think of this one photographer in New York specifically. I was shooting Paris at Terminal 5. It was like when I was like 19 years old, I think, and I had gotten my photo pass through the opener, which was lights, and my pass like said lights on it, and security like could not give less of a crap whether I was in there for the headliner or not. Like, they just let me in. And this guy was like, "Oh, you shouldn't even be in here because your pass just says the opener. So I don't even think you should be allowed to shoot the headliner." And I just turned to the security guy and I was like, "Is it fine if I'm here?" Like, kind of sarcastically. And he's like, "Yeah, I don't care." and then the funny thing is that a year later I started working for Live Nation, and I was shooting this show for them, and they had gotten me like I don't really know what it's called. It's like access where you can go like in the soundboard and stuff. You can't go backstage, but just like in a couple other areas that like normal photo passes can't get you. And the same guy was there, and he's like, "Oh, you have that special pass, like that's pretty cool, like you shoot Nikon too?" Like, "I shoot Nikon." And he was like trying to like be all friendly, and I was like, "Dude,
Do you think he remembered you from before?
no way. Absolutely no way." That was the
Yeah.
funniest part for me.
Of course. It's like once the roles are reversed, once you have something cool, they're like sucking up to you.
It's so weird when somebody who's like very clearly like disrespected you in the past, even if they probably don't remember, because I'm sure that that's just like who they are as a person, it's like when you have that moment of getting a bit more successful and then being like, "Oh crap," and then trying to like be colleagues instead of looking down on you. It's such a weird experience, and I feel like it happens so much more to like girls.
I haven't been like dedicated to shooting concerts in a while because by the time I was graduating in 2018, I was traveling so much that like I was abroad a lot and I wasn't like prioritizing going to gigs and stuff. And then once I got back, like I did shoot a few shows recently, but they were at venues that didn't have photo pits. And it was just because I've known the venue people or like the promoters or stuff and kind of got photo passes that way. But from what I remember, like to me, the music industry in Austin is more low key, and that like because I've also worked on the marketing and event side of stuff. Like I used to do digital marketing for a concert promoter, and we had a festival and stuff like that. So from my experience, like I don't think there's as much. I want to say like there's not as much rampant sexism here, but I don't like. I think, musicians probably have a much different experience than I do of like, female musicians being like, "Oh, do you need help with that?" That type of stuff. So that being said, I always felt like the divide was more like a third, two-thirds like male photographers. And I think now it's more even just because there are so many more like young people shooting. But I've never I think as far as clicks go, I think it was more like me projecting that there might be a click versus there actually being a click. I mean, there's definitely like the group of people who know each other because like for the most part, I said when I was so young, like the photographers to me were all like this was their professional jobs.
Yeah.
So I was like intimidated by that. And so they had all been shooting together for a very long time and all knew each other. And so I was just very so shy that I would never go out of my way to like talk to anyone. And then it was just like I was at so many shows that we would like smile and wave at each other and like sometimes make small talk.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it is now with like so many younger photographers, just because I haven't been around at like a proper like photo pit in a while.
Have you guys felt more like people judge you based off of your age more or being a girl more? Or do you think that is a mix of both? Or like what's your experience with that? Like has there ever been a thing where it's like, "Oh, like you have X's on your hands, what are you doing here?" Or has it been more like looking at you like, "Why do you have the all access pass? You're a girl." Like what do you think is more like polarizing for people, is age or gender?
I think both for me. Especially when I've been like working super closely with a band and have like the all access pass. Like sometimes it's like for the opener, and then there'll be like a big headliner and like their entire crew, and like most of them are probably men. I've had a few instances at the same venue, at the Fillmore in Philadelphia, where like, well, one time I got yelled at by the headliner's crew because I wasn't coming in the right door. Yeah. And then the other time, well, actually, this happened to me multiple times, but when I was under 21, Philadelphia used to have like a law where the bars had to be separated from the main concert area. So I couldn't go through the bar, and that was the easiest way up to the photo pit. So I had to push my way up through the entire general admission crowd to get to the photo pit. And I would
Oh
like
my
get up there,
gosh.
and I would be all sweaty and like breathing hard, and like the security would just look at me like, "What are you doing?" And everyone else could just walk up around. So I felt like that made me feel like it was purposefully not made for me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And now it's like the laws have changed, but also I'm over 21, so it's it's a lot different, but like I just feel like both aspects, and I've definitely gotten comments from like older members of like bands teams that are definitely directed to me based on my age and gender.
Mm-hmm.
One time I was at this show, and I had been shooting this band a few times, and like we were kind of friends, I would say. And I was working for this company, Lomography, as an intern, and we were doing a story on them, and they invited one guy from our work to come and like shoot photos, and I didn't know this, and then the manager told me, they were like, "Oh, like this guy is coming from Lomo." And I was like, "But my boss already knew I'd be here, like I don't know why I can't just do the photos." And then they were kind of like, "Oh, like what's your problem with this guy?" Like, and I'm like, "I don't have any problem with this guy, like I think his photos are fine." And I was just like, it doesn't make sense for him to come all the way out here if I'm already here and like they know my photos and like me. And then it was kind of like weird because I felt like they were trying to like goad me into like saying something bad about this other person at my work, which I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't gonna do. And then we get downstairs and we're about to like go out and get something to eat, and then the manager like pulls me aside and he's like, "Why are you trying to create drama? Like we need good vibes today." And I was just like, "What do you mean I'm trying to create drama?" And then the band like came out, and then we just went out, and like I still don't know to this day if they know like that happened, but it just made me feel like really icky for the rest of the time I was there.
So did they know the photographer who Loma was sending, or was it like they knew you and knew your work already, and then they asked Lomo? Like, I don't understand. Did Lomo choose to send somebody down, or were they like, "Oh, can you send someone down?"
So they already knew me. They didn't know that this other person,
Yeah.
or they didn't know this other person. I'd never worked with them before. And um like Lomo like knew that they were doing an article, knew that I would be there at the show.
Mm-hmm.
And the manager just like, I don't really exactly know what happened, but he just got off the phone and was like, "Oh, this person from Lomo is coming." And I just felt kind of like offended on both sides because I was like, one, you and your band already know me and like me. You
Yeah.
know that I work there. And two, like the people at Lomo know that I'm here. So like I didn't really feel like it was as much of a Lomo thing though as like a manager thing, because a few months later, this thing happened where he was putting this thing together, and he called my boss at Lomo and was like, "I just have all men for this thing. I think it would look kind of awkward if I didn't have any women, but I don't know any." And he was looking for a female photographer. And this guy knew me. He's known me for like over a year at this point. And yeah, it just felt personal, is all I'm gonna say.
I feel like the thing, and I feel like I've said this to both of you before, but I feel like 9 times out of 10, when you work with a band and the band is the one that hires you, the manager has like this like superiority complex where they're like, "I didn't pick them, so I need to like be extra bossy towards them." Because I've just had,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like also, and this is like no offense, because like this is a very particular like group of like people who are managers, but like the male manager over the age of like 40
Yes.
usually is somebody who like me was ungifted in music but wanted to be involved in music, so they became a band manager, and then we're like, "I'm in charge of everything. It doesn't matter if it fucks up this band's career. I'm just gonna make my own choices because I know it's right." But like they aren't up with like social media, they aren't up with like the times of stuff, and they'll just like do things that like are counterproductive compared to like what the band has talked to like a creative about that they want to work with. And I feel like it's like an ongoing issue in the industry, because I mean, you've had that problem, I've had that problem, I have other friends who've had that problem, specifically with like white men managers over the age of 40. So I think it's just like a common occurrence of like these men who like weren't good enough to be in a band figuring out a way to work in music, and then having these like young women who are like opinionated and good at what they do coming in and being like, okay, like I've been hired, I'm in control, and they're like, but I've been in control this whole time, what do you mean you're in control now?
Or my favorite is when they think that you'll work for free or for less money, or they can like get more content out of you just because you're like supposedly unexperienced. Yeah, that's my favorite.
There's always that thing where it's like, well, you haven't toured before, and it's like, just because I haven't done like a month-long tour doesn't mean that a band hasn't like paid for me to come to like a show out of state, or been like, oh, like we're doing like a weekend tour. Because I mean, my experience growing up was like, it was a real popular thing to do, to have like the weekenders where it'd be like Friday to Sunday, because like most of the bands were like in college or like in high school, some. And it would be like, oh, like, do you want to come out for the weekend? But I would never count that as touring, because I'd be like, oh, we went to like the Crazy Donkey on Long Island, we went to like this tiny ass venue in Connecticut, and then came back to Long Island and like played Vibe Lounge. I'm like, not, how is that a tour? Like, that's not a tour, it's like a weekend trip to like your friend's rich parent, like grandma's house in Connecticut, and like back to Long Island.
But I think that's a good point, because I think like this is true across all industries, is that like men are more confident in their abilities and also kind of like embellishing their abilities. So like a male photographer might have like said, yeah, I toured, and like use that as like to have the same experience of you, but like call it like touring, something like that.
Yeah, but I think that, and that's the thing that we've mentioned a lot, is just like the internalized misogyny of it all. Of like, we're taught to kind of like downplay our experience, but also, I mean, it's just that thing where it's like, oh, like we're not like, my mind is like, oh, if I've gone on tour, it's been like a month, or I've been like living in a van and like not showering, was like what my mindset of tour was. Whereas yes, like I did have guy friends who were like, oh, I'm going on this tour, and I'd be like, you're going up to Connecticut for 2 nights, like what are you talking about? I said earlier how like I didn't really realize that it was like a man's world with it, and I don't know if I was just sheltered or at the time that was actually the case. But I mean, Jenna, like you mentioned, like knowing when you started like looking up to, in a way, of like Tom Falcone and like Matt Vogel and stuff. So like, was your mindset that most of the successful people in like that pop punk bubble that we were interested in were more male, other than like Ashley Osbourne, or were you aware of other women?
No, 100%. Like I'm pretty sure. Okay, no, Ashley was like one of the few. There was like two other girls I knew who I don't remember their names, and I also don't know if they're photographers anymore.
Mm-hmm.
That like kind of did stuff. And then the blog that I was writing for, it was like these girls, and it was like these two girls in college who started this music blog so they could do like interviews and all that stuff. And so like I worked with them. My impression was that it was mostly dominated by men. But that like didn't stop me from wanting to join in, because I wasn't like, oh, this is a man's thing, I can't do it. I was just like, I know a lot of dudes who do it, but I want to do that also. So that didn't like stop me.
Yeah. And Sophia, what about you? Like, because you obviously are a decent amount like younger than me. So when you first were interested in it, were you aware of like successful female photographers, or was it more male photographers that you were aware of?
I definitely knew about Ashley Osbourne, and I don't know how to pronounce her name. I hope I don't butcher it. But Pune Ghana.
Yeah, she's from
Yeah.
Austin.
Yeah,
Really
I
cool.
really like, she was like my favorite growing up. She still is one of my favorites. Like,
Yeah.
I think her work is stunning. But like those were the only women that I knew of, and then like obviously I had like heard of like the other big ones like Adam Elmakias, and but yeah, I definitely like also noticed like a lot more photographers in pop punk, just because I felt like the bands were like working with photographers a lot more and like promoting their photographers, whereas like in music that I listened to, I wasn't really like a pop punk fan. Like I definitely liked more of like indie and like alternative rock. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
feel like the like photographer band relationship was there as much.
Yeah, I feel like the photographer, at least again, as somebody who also listens to both sorts of music, I feel like it wasn't until the past like 4 years that the more like indie bands started having like very clear photographers that they would tour with quite often. And I feel like it was more of that pop punk thing. But I feel like the thing with pop punk having those is that pop punk has always been like not even just not a boys club, but just like a friendship circle where it's like, if you're my friend, I'll give you a job even if I don't know if you're good at it. And so there were a lot of people who started out touring without any experience and were kind of crap when they first started, and like might still not be that great today because they haven't had to really improve, because it's that whole just like, oh, these are like my friends who bring me on tour all the time. I have a full-time job with them. It's no big deal. And I mean, there are some bands I could name, but I'm not gonna. I feel like starting beef with Ashton Irwin is one thing, but starting beef with people who might actually DM me is a whole other situation. But I feel like collectively we can all probably think of like 3 or 4 bands that have a photographer on tour who hasn't really grown that much over time and just been around because they've been friendly with them or whatever the case may be. And I feel like a lot of those situations, it has been men, like, or guys that get those opportunities. Because I mean, I've had bands that I've been friendly with and like genuine friends with who I've made it very clear, like, I want to tour, I want to tour, I want to tour. And then I just never would get asked, but like anytime they'd come to my city, they'd like text me or whatever and be like, you're on the list with the photo pass, like, can't wait to see you. And then I'd be like, oh, cool. And I'd like put the photos on my blog, and then they'd be like, hey, where are the photos? And I'd be like, oh, like, you haven't asked me to work for you, so where are your photos? Like, what's going on? but
Oh my
but they would
gosh.
have like, they would have touring photographers, and it would be a guy, and like 9 times out of 10 it would be like some guy that they like went to high school with or whatever the deal was. I was always really frustrated growing up because I got into music at like a very young age, and like music meaning like pop punk stuff, like I was very into it from when I was like 11. And I was really frustrated because in my mind I was like, if I was 5 years older I would be successful because all of these bands that I love are from my area, like, or like a general area where like if I'd been going to these shows like I'm going to them now with my camera, like I could have been this like successful photographer because I would have been in. Whereas like when I got older, like most of the bands that came out of Long Island were never like that big. I mean, people knew them, like Stereo Skyline, but I mean, they're kind of embarrassing. But it's just that like interesting thing where it's like that unfortunate jealousy of being like, oh, I was like never in the right place at the right time. But I don't think that that should be necessary. Like, I think you should have a relationship with a photographer, but I think also you should hire photographers who have like done an interview with you or like done a shoot with you and you've got on really well, and the photos like encapsulate your band really like perfectly, instead of just hiring somebody who you're friends with. But that's just me.
I think like, okay, I have a few thoughts. In the pop punk scene, it is very, like you said, tight knit, and people do just like take their friends out. And I think part of that is like, oh, like you have to be able to hang on tour, and like we already know this person, like we know they can hang and all that. And I think that kind of leads into the whole boys club thing,
Mhm.
because like there are just not a lot of women or non-men who tour in the pop punk world, like, period. And I also think on the other side of it, it's so like, maybe pop punk, maybe also this includes like indie bands a bit, but like there's so many photographers now, and it feels like everyone's in this competition just to tour, when there's so much more to a photographer's career than touring.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's certain people who are always just trying to tour with the same set of bands, and it's like, go outside your circle. There's so many more bands out there, and like the pop punk bands or whatever bands that are touring with the same photographer, like, are not going to stop touring with the same photographer at this point. Like, they've had plenty of opportunities, like it's not going to happen. And like,
Yeah.
if you're in that situation, like you need to expand your network of people, and start talking to other bands that might actually take you on tour.
When I was younger, it seemed like the only option in music was touring. Whereas now, in my mind, it seems like you don't have to tour to be a successful music photographer. So what is it about touring now that you feel like that's still what you'd rather do than being someone who is just like the go-to person like in a certain city for like a certain like list of bands?
So, like, I thought, like, when I was in high school and, like, I found out that touring photography was a thing, like, I thought that's, like, what I wanted to do, and, like, it definitely still is what I want to do. But I think this whole like pandemic thing has made me realize like long term, like that's not what I want. Like I do want to be able to have like a home someday somewhere and like have like some kind of stable like life. I don't want to be traveling like literally all the time. Like I would like to travel, but I don't want to like be living out of a suitcase for 95% of the year. So I definitely want to tour still, but I see more of touring as like a vehicle to like editorial photography, which is like what I want to do, or like kind of like fine art music photography, because like a lot of my other favorite music photographers, like the ones from like way back in like the 70s, like Mick Rock and Neil Preston, like toured with like David Bowie and Iggy Pop, Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
But then they like became like more than that. They became more like fine art and like documentary type of photography.
Yeah.
So like I think that like being around people on a tour like helps you build that relationship where like you get really comfortable with each other and you can get those photos that like you really want to take. Whereas being a go-to photographer in a city, you might not have enough time to build that kind of relationship. And a lot of the bands that I work with are super small too. So when I tour, that would definitely be something that they pay me for. And when I just meet up with them in the city, sometimes they pay me, sometimes they don't. And it's kind of like the understanding that it's going to be more. And I don't really feel like I'm, you know, just going to be this photographer that's pushed to the side when they can pay someone to tour. Um, so yeah, I think that's what it is about for me, because I would like to, you know, make books someday. I'd like to have gallery shows, that type of stuff. And I think it's a lot more, it's about a lot more than just the clout of touring. I think it's more about like the quality of photos you're able to get.
Yeah, I think that's really important distinction of like, because to me the appeal with touring was always like being able to work with an artist over a longer period of time, and exactly what you're saying, like the more fine art side of it and the documentarian side of it, of just like capturing, because to me like I love capturing people how they are and like what is happening and like the documenting side of that. But it seems like there are a lot of people whose goal with touring is the, like you said, the clout of touring, or more it's like, oh, I have access to this person, or like they wanted, like they would, it's almost like they wish they could be the band, you know, and like this is the closest they can get to being that level, like that status of like being close to the band as a photographer. But and so that, like, I think there are people who are seeking touring for that regard as well.
And I feel like when people are just like, I just want to go on tour, and then you don't really see any of that magic, like you were talking about, Sophia, because like my favorite like rock photographer is Ken Regan, and he used to like tour with the Rolling Stones. And I like have had this book. It goes everywhere with me because when I'm sad, I look at it. And it's just like my favorite thing because he, like, you could tell that the bands trusted him. And I always just thought that was really like magical. And I feel like that was always my issue when like guys would just bring their friends on tour. Because I'd be like, if you just hired a girl who like loves music with every fiber of her being, like you would have photos that people would hang up in a gallery. But like you're not going to if your photographer doesn't think like that. And that's always what bothered me. And I feel like that like separates in a way like the people who are doing something just to do it, just to like tour and like have that lifestyle of like not having a 9 to 5 job, and those who do something because they're passionate about it. But I feel like now there's also this thing where if you haven't made it by the time you're 25, you're old and they put you in a drawer and you're not really given opportunities anymore. It's just like, and it's this weird thing that I always see like online or stuff. Like I follow like tons of like photographer accounts, like photo editors, because that's like what I do as my job. And that's another thing that's like brought the whole like storytelling aspect into things. Is like I wanted to be a photo editor so that I could produce shoots, so that when you look in a magazine you like feel something when you look at photos. My dream job has always been, since I got the first ever Rolling Stone cover shoot with Avril Lavigne was to be like the head of the photo department at Rolling Stone magazine, because I was like, if I was in charge of this, like, because the shoot was cool, it was really amazing, but at the same time I was like, if a girl did this, like, this would be so much better, because like we know how to do things, like we understand music in like this different way. It was like my mindset at age like 12 was like, oh, like a woman would do this better. And like,
I love that.
well, I just feel like any band who does really well, and like there are women in the kitchen, like any like backstage, like behind the scenes, like bands who don't have women involved in the process, I feel like don't understand that women are the answer to like fame, because we've never been wrong. It's just that weird thing that I've like never really understood, how like women love music so like viscerally in this like very specific way, that like when I talk to guy friends who also really love bands like the same band as me, like how we love that band is so different. And so I've just always found it really interesting that like the bands that we love are a lot of the times filled with men, but I feel like they can never feel the way that we about their music that we feel about their music. Like I don't feel like it translates for some reason. And I feel kind of the same way about music photography. I feel like you can tell when a girl takes a photo compared to when a guy takes a photo. Again, I'm gendering things, and I'm sorry, I'm a fake old person, and I don't I don't know how to do this, but
I feel like now it's actually harder to tell though, because I feel like people are like trying to go for like a certain specific style, and like that style might be like this specific photographer that like is really huge, or like,
so like Jenny McCord, who like she works with like Ellie Goulding and all these people like in England, like I just feel like you can tell if somebody gave me a photo, like if I was doing an article on Ellie Goulding and I was like, hi, I need like PR photos, like I feel like you can tell when you see a photo of Ellie Goulding that somebody who like cares deeply took the photo, and like cares deeply in a way that like men can't. But
Photos are really special. I agree. But I don't know. I don't think you can say like,
sorry, I'm generalizing so much.
I know. I was gonna say I don't think you can say like all men, blah 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 blah.
No,
But
never all. But
to a degree, yeah, to a degree. No, it's like there's a certain like empathy and like emotion brought, and like careful, like thoughtfulness brought into it. That's more, maybe you can say like more common with like non-male photographers.
Let me rephrase that. Non-white male photographers.
Mm.
Like I already followed like people of like all different like genders, races, whatever, but during the Black Lives Matter movement, like a lot of people were like, oh, like we're gonna make chains of like Black photographers, and I'd follow people and I'd be like, wow, this photo is really moving, and I always had that mind space of like, if a photo is moving me, it was probably taken by a woman, and then I'd see it and I'd be like, oh no, like a man took this. And I feel like anybody who's not been given white male privilege like can do things that people with
Yes,
white
okay,
male privilege
wait.
can't do.
This is it. Okay, so I think like white men are just so used to like getting praise for literally breathing air that they can do the bare minimum and it be called amazing. But then non-men and non-white people have to like go above and beyond to prove like how good they are. And so that kind of comes across in photos of like not having to prove how good they are, but like actually figuring out how to be a really good photographer, because they don't get the same praise that white men do for doing the bare minimum.
No, 100%. Because I feel like, Sophia, the thing that before we were friends that I always really liked about your photography, and why because like my mom always asked me like, oh, like how do you wind up with like these friends who are just like vastly different in age from you? And I'm like, well, the internet age doesn't exist, but also it's just like you see like a personality or a type of work or something, and you can be moved by something and be like, I want to know that person. And like the way that you like utilize color and like all these things just felt so like new, but like reminiscent of old, where I just was like, I have to make this person my friend. And so I mean, like, what did you feel like you had to really hone in on your own style really quickly because of like everything that's available online, or how did you even like come about creating in the way that you do?
so one point to the previous thing we were talking about, is that I think a lot of it has to do with subject as well, because like me relating to a female artist is like so much different than a male photographer is going to relate to a female artist than I'm going to relate to a male artist, and like so on. So I think like that's that's a lot of why I've decided to like work with more female artists, is because I feel like there's just a certain bond and understanding there that like might also be similar, well, not similar, but kind of the same way that like Warped Tour bands will take their like friends from high school out. It's like, you know, there's that understanding of like we're men, you know. But
Yeah.
like I like when I work with female artists because it's like, you know, we're females working together to like fight this stereotype type of thing. And
Yeah.
like also I just feel like some female artists just feel more comfortable with like a female like backstage, like they might be changing, they might be like talking about things that like maybe a male photographer like wouldn't understand. So it's just like a completely different experience on both sides. But to your point about my work, um when I started out I was shooting darkroom photography in high school, and I really liked film. So I was trying to like emulate film when I first started, because
Yeah.
I didn't really shoot film at concerts, and I didn't really know how until I got to college, and my teacher was really great. He like told me like he's like, I don't know why, you know, you're shooting all this stuff, like you shoot music, like take your film camera to a concert. So I did, and I guess that's kind of like been a big part of my work now, because I shoot like probably primarily film now. Yeah, and like I was talking about earlier too with my favorite types of photographers, like I would look at those photos of like David Bowie, and they would just by Mick Rock, and the colors were just so vibrant. And I also had this one teacher in college, she's a professional printer, and she would like talk about tasting colors. And so like that's kind of like how I always felt my mind worked, is that it's just like, I don't know, like it's like this other experience, like it can add so much to the photo, and like there's certain ways that like different colors make you feel. And whether you're adding color or taking it away, like it can completely change the photo. It's not all about how you compose it. It's not about what gear you have. It's really not about whether you shoot on film or digital, because you can get similar looks on either. But I think a lot of it has to do with just that personal touch. And I found that since I loved color so much, that was just something that I felt like I could add that would make me stand out.
And I feel like that's also the thing where I came to the realization that white men are the problem. Is that like, it, again, like just bringing it back to like the pop punk thing, is I feel like there are certain photographers where like it looks like they pass their preset around, where it's like those teals and oranges, or that like grainy, like muted green sort of vibe, where you're just like, they all shoot very similarly, and I feel like that takes away the magic of photography.
That's another thing for me, is that I would like look at those photos when I was starting out, and I was like, this is not how I envision a concert, and I want my photos to be like how I personally experience the concert, which is like full of light and color. Like I don't really like turning my whites down or whatever. Like I don't like subdued hues. I like there to be like a lot of different colors, and I want it to feel like personal. And like also that's something I focused on for my senior thesis, is I did a lot of research into synesthesia and like color association with music. And I think that maybe subconsciously I've been doing it all along. It's just like really interesting, I guess, to see the people that I would consider have more unique perspectives, like how they would use color, as opposed to me, as opposed to you, or as opposed to Jenna. So
Yeah. No, definitely. And I think just to like wrap the conversation up in like a nice little bow, I mean, do you guys have any specific experiences that you remember that they didn't right out say, like, you're too young, or like, oh, like it might be weird having a girl in the van, or whatever the case is, where you felt like you finally had that like moment where you're like, oh, like this is gonna, like my age or my gender is going to be like held against me, and it's something that I'm gonna have to fight against for like the rest of my career?
for me, there's this band that I got to work with, and we got pretty close, and I always thought I would work with them. and their manager even went so far as telling me that they wanted to take me on tour. They told my friends that they wanted to take me on tour. We had multiple phone calls about it. They asked me like about different venues in New York, like where I thought would be best for them. Like they got a ton of opinions for me, and that tour happened, and the manager kind of just dropped off the face of the earth when it got close. And I was like, but what about, me going on tour? And I was like, oh, not this time. So I was like, okay, maybe next time. Then they went on tour, and about a year later, and they brought a guy. And that's just kind of when I felt like, okay, this isn't going to happen. But I didn't like get super down about it. I was just like, we're going to find a way to make this happen. Maybe these aren't the right people, but maybe this could be a sign that like this is not who you're supposed to be working with.
And so just like off of that, I guess like in a more positive light and less depressing, from these experiences and just experiences in general, like working in the music industry and growing up in it, like what have you learned and have been able to take to like make yourself feel more empowered in what you do?
First thing for me is that I used to take things personally a lot. Like if a publicist said you can't have a photo pass, like I would just feel like really upset and be like, what did I do wrong? But like it's not about me. It's about, what the publication is like and what the publicist is looking for. And like then that kind of translates to jobs too. Like if you don't get something, like maybe it's just the universe saying that you're not the right fit. You need to keep looking for other people to work with. Because now I feel like I found like a lot of great women that I work with, like the grading committee specifically. They have a female manager that's awesome. Their singer is obviously female, so they've been really good to work with. I work with this other musician, Rafaela, who's also female, and it's just been like nice working with people that feel like get me, and like also I don't feel like are going to use me for free photos or try to like sweep me under the rug when an opportunity comes along, because I do feel like they genuinely want me to be there. And that's another thing, is like working with people that make you feel valued, because I feel like for a long time I was just like trying to make things work that weren't necessarily like the best situations. And you want it to be a good working relationship. You want it to be like you're friends with the person, but it's also professional, and they genuinely feel like you add something to the team and not just like they're using you for free content. So
I think that's a really important point also, and I think so many people are like maybe either don't realize it at first or are willing to overlook that just for the opportunity to be a tour photographer like we were talking about. But I think finding that right fit is really important. I think like for me personally, especially because I was just so shy when I was so young, and so for anyone who's like listening who's maybe younger or wanting to get into the world of photography and is just as young as a photographer, not necessarily age, I think it's, doing the homework yourself, like not relying on others to do things for you, and like putting in the work, putting in the hustle to get there, pushing for opportunities, and not just stopping at the first band that says, no, we're not going to take you on tour, because it's exactly what Sophia said. Like there's going to be a right fit. You just haven't found it yet.
I think that it is really important for people who are listening to know that like you're never too old to start and you're never too young to start, and don't let anybody ever make you feel like you're too young or you don't fit in because you are not a man. Like there's room for everybody. And like I think that this is something really important that took me way too long to realize, is like there's nothing wrong with having a career pivot, with doing something slightly different than what your original dream goal was to do, because you can still find joy in these things. So it's just always remembering that like if you think that you're good at something and you're excited about it and passionate about it, just keep doing it. It doesn't really matter what other people think. If one blog gives you the chance, like that's the place that you belong. Like if that website is like, we want to give you a home and let you shoot here, like you don't need to aim higher than that if you don't want to, or like you don't need to feel the pressure of having to want to go on tour. Like if you don't want to go on tour, that's fine. If you want to go on tour, that's fine. But touring isn't the end all to be all. And I feel like we're all good examples of that, because we've all like had really fun and amazing experiences. Like we're all friends because of concert photography. Like it can change your life. Anything in the music industry can change your life in different ways, and it's like there's always a way in if you want to find it.
All right, Sophia, we are giving you the honor of talking about a band of the week in 30 seconds or less. So I'm going to count you down. Ready? 3, 2, 1.
the band I'm talking about is Eliza and the Delusionals. They're from Australia. They have two females, 50-50, and they're kind of a rock sound. The singer's got a really awesome voice. My favorite song from them is Just Exist, and they have an EP called State of Living in an Objective Reality that came out during the pandemic. They were supposed to be on tour with Paris. I was supposed to be there, but you should listen to them.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Sophia. It's been a lovely conversation. Why don't you tell people where they can find you after this?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. This was so much fun. Makes me wish that concerts were back, but we will all be hanging together when they are. You guys can follow me at Sophia Ragomo on Twitter and Instagram if you want to continue the conversation about being a female in the music industry.
We hope you guys enjoyed the conversation that we had today. We think that it's kind of an important one to cover, and we love that Sophia joined us for it. Again, if you want to continue the conversation with any of us on Twitter, you can follow us at Name3Songs, and then I'm at Sara_Feigin, and Jenna is at Jenna_million, and then Sophia's links are also going to be in the description below. So thanks so much for joining us on Name3Songs. Until next time, never let anyone make you feel bad about your favorite band.
And you're never too cool to listen to Harry Styles.
Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when each episode comes out, and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps.
If you want to find out more about anything we referenced in this episode, you can visit name3songs.com.